finally, a source of raw, real, and honest information on healthcare issues that matter most. Welcome to BS Free MD. From the latest medical information to how to stay sane as a doctor or a patient, no subject is taboo, and no BS is allowed. Now, let's welcome your hosts, Doctors May and Tim Hindmarsh.
Hey, we're back. We survived Christmas. We survived COVID. Barely.
No, we both survived, but now we're getting to the end of the year. This will be the last podcast.
This is our last episode for the year. We made number 52.
Yeah.
Here we are.
Yeah, so this will be an interesting one. Super interesting stuff. We're talking to Dr. Sabine Hazan, who is probably at this time the world authority on fecal transplant. And
maybe even, that for sure, as well as a nationally renowned expert on the gut microbiome.
Yeah, she's a gastroenterologist that practices in Malibu, California.
Sounds rough.
Yeah, tough. And no one's full of shit in Malibu, California. And she owns a company called Progenibiome.
Right. It's a genetic sequencing research company dedicated to understanding the gut flora and doing research there. And she is a gastroenterologist. She actually is a fellow Canadian and went to school in Canada, then did her internship and residency in the U.S. and her fellowship in gastroenterology. And she's kind of moved around a little bit, but has settled in California now. And she is hitting the conference circuit now with her book that's out called Let's Talk Shit. It's all about disease digestion and fecal transplant. And it's really fun read. It's if you know nothing about the gut or how digestion occurs, it's great. If you're already medical, it's still a fun read. And I learned a whole lot of interesting little tidbits and facts in there. And she gets into fecal transplant and the whole flora thing. So it's a good read for anybody. But before we get into our interview, we have a cute and fun little word from our sponsor this week. So let's hear from him.
You're you in 30 years. Whoa. Some advice. Open a Laurel Road checking account when you refinance your student loans. You could get a rate as low as 1.37% variable APR, plus a cash bonus.
I can do that.
Also, don't date Parker.
Ew, the defense attorney?
Trust me.
Save yourself with Laurel Road. Visit laurelroad.com/saveyourself for more information. Rates depend on your credit profile and include discounts. Terms and conditions apply. Laurel Road is a brand of KeyBank, member FDIC.
Okay, well, we are super excited today, May and I, to have Dr. Sabine Hazan with us. She's been doing some tremendous work in the world of the microbiome. If you don't know what the microbiome is, you haven't been paying attention. And she's been there really from the beginning. So, Dr. Hazan, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. And thank you for having me, both of you. A little bit about myself. I'm a gastroenterologist by trade. I was doing GI until colonoscopy. After colonoscopy, it wasn't really fulfilling me. So I went the research route and was doing clinical trials for pharmaceutical companies, bringing products to market for pharma. And, I was always known in the world of clinical trials as the queen of C. diff, a little bug you get from antibiotics. And so when those clinical trials didn't work, I would do fecal transplant on them, which is the process of taking stools from a healthy donor and putting it into a patient with C. diff. When fecal transplant became a capsule and a clinical trial, and I literally was having clinical trials from Korea and China, and I'm like, we're in the fecal material business and we don't even know what the hell we're doing. So one could say I went a little bit rogue and started my company to understand the microbiome. And I was also seeing a lot of things with fecal transplant. A patient with arthritis was improving. These cases I like to call Martians. A Martian shows up at your doorstep and you're like, oh my God, there's life on Mars. So when a patient with Alzheimer's started, improving, to me, that was a Martian. And I said, wow, there's something that I did in the gut that improved this guy's memory. Or a case from two cases from Colleen Kelly, where the two patients had alopecia areata. She did fecal transplant for C. diff, and then the patient grew hair. And the whole time I was like, they grew hair? What grows hair that you put stools?
Wow.
And so that became my obsession because I have a lot of hair. So I said, well, maybe there's a bacteria in my gut that I can like culture, and that could be a new product. So I felt like I kind of became Indiana Jones, looking for the Holy Grail, except the Holy Grail is fecal material. And here we are.
Well,
and
who would think?
Exactly.
Yuck.
So
The thing I hate most is poop. I hated it when our kids pooped. I vomit. Tim had to deal with it. Vomit, I deal with poop. Patients with poop, I hate it. And yeah, there you go. Who would ever think that's the Holy Grail of medicine?
Yeah, I'm the same way, by the way. I used to do, when Neil Stoneman 25 years ago said to me, the future is in poop, I said, please, but if the colonoscopy was not clean, I was out of there. I was like, re-prep, sorry, poor prep, redo. But when I had to start playing with it, so I had done my first case. It was on a doctor who was dying. And so I didn't want to lose him. And so that was my first case. And I had to kind of figure it out because there's no one tells you, like, how do you implant stools? How do you prepare it and all that? So I had to figure it out. And then I figured it out. And then the patient, my doctor survived. And it was kind of the first awareness that, oh my God, it works. And then when you start doing another one, and then you don't even think about it. And to the point that it's kind of almost funny because I'm like you. My husband my kids would poop and I would say, GI consult, sorry.
That's right. Code Brown.
I know, exactly.
Living room, Code Brown.
Cardiologist doing it. I see enough at work. So yeah, but then eventually you kind of bypass that and you see so many amazing things in the microbiome that is all these microbes like trillions of bugs. We've only identified about 15,000 to 20,000. And we basically know probably about 1,000 that are causing problems. But there's new bugs, like Blottia. Did you learn that? No. Rosaburia. All these bugs and how they relate with each other. And, Alistopes fine Goldie, which is named after the doctor who actually guided me through this path of opening my lab. And, it's just like, wow, it's doing something. Even when you look at all these bugs and you see all of them together, there's an area that is in the gray zone that I like to call it, in space, where some kids with autism have the same pattern. And it's kind of in that gray zone. So it's really the next frontier. And I feel like I'm riding cable in a way because I'm discovering all these things on a clinical picture. So.
No, I can just imagine a new version of Star Trek. Shit, the final frontier.
Shit.
These are the voyages. And, I'm going to use some of my rudimentary knowledge of this to kind of set the stage for some of our non-medical listeners. So when you say stool transplant, that means, okay, that's not like you get an enema. Like this goes in through an NG tube into your upper gut.
It actually goes from your rectum to your cecum, all the way to the cecum.
See, I know.
So are you transplanting it with like a colonoscopy, a rectal colonoscopy?
Yeah, via colonoscopy. The problem with the NG tube, yes, you can get success for C. diff with NG tube. But when you're doing, cases where you're trying to improve something else. So, for example, patient with Alzheimer's. I wanted to see if fecal transplant was helping him. So I could have done an NG tube. I could have done a fleet enema. And that would have worked for his C. diff. But I was more interested to see, I wonder what it does for his Alzheimer's. So I went to the cecum. Why the cecum? Because what I've come to realize is the cecum is the compost bin. Remember when you do gardening and you do composting? You're putting your green vegetables and you're putting your your foods that are left over full of bacteria. What are you doing when you're doing that? You're composting, right? And then eventually this brown dirt comes out for your soil, right? Same thing with the cecum. The cecum has, the motion of the colon goes, one way, and the cecum is the other way to store and to mulch and to create that brown poop, essentially. So it mixes in with the bile acids and everything to kind of like mix in all that. So the cecum is really where it's at. And I think to me, that was my first thought. I need to go to the cecum. Also, the appendix, there is some thoughts that the appendix is just a reservoir of the microbes you started off with. So it's always kind of refeeding. So,
well, mine was until it exploded.
And then it was not, yeah.
Then it was trying to kill me.
Why don't you explain, so for the non-medical listeners, a little bit more about C. diff and why it's so bad? I mean, I think a lot of people now have heard like how you acquire it, but some people might not. So why don't you can just give a little bit of background on C. diff, why it's bad, how you get it, and how you treat it?
So
different options.
Yeah. So what we discovered with C. diff, it was interesting because for 25 years I've tried to kill C. diff. And initially I would give it antibiotics, vancomycin, flagyl, fidaxomicin. And when those antibiotics didn't work, then clinical trials, and then clinical trials, fecal transplant. What I learned from C. diff is that so C. diff is a bacteria basically that secretes a toxin and creates diarrhea in people. So extreme diarrhea, and it's very difficult to diagnose. Sometimes you could pick it up with a stool culture or a PCR of looking for C. diff. But sometimes it takes like 6 stool studies to pick up C. diff. So it is difficult to pick up. People die from it, from dehydration, diarrhea. It's it's a big problem. When we discovered fecal transplant, and really we're all following the work of Dr. Tom Barodi in Australia, and then I followed Neil Stolman, Colleen Kelly, all these geniuses that played with stools early on in their career, and noticed that it was, what I took it to the next level is I realized C. diff is 2.3 billion years old. So it's an old bug. I mean, it's been on the planet. It's in cats, it's in chickens, it's in rabbits. And then what I discovered in my genetic lab when we started analyzing it, the first thing I did is I noticed that it was in my stools, but I don't have any diarrhea or problems. So I said, well, of course it makes sense. Because remember in med school, you were taught it's contaminated by hand, by person to person. In fact, at the hospital, they put you in gowns and gloves because they think the doctor is spreading it, right?
Right. Full PPE for a patient that's got C. diff. It's like COVID or Ebola, right?
Exactly. And so, and in my office, I never wore full PPE with my patients. I never got C. diff. I never had diarrhea. In fact, sometimes, I would hug these patients and I'm like, don't worry, I could lose some weight if I had it, and then I know how to cure it.
It's a great way to lose weight.
Yeah, I was never really scared of it, and I never really got it. And then so when I found it, I thought, with that old mentality of like, oh, it's caught by person to person, I thought, well, it makes sense. I have C. diff. Here I am seeing all these patients. I'm hugging them. Maybe C. diff is going to kill me at some point, but right now it's not doing anything. And then I started seeing it in my kids, and I'm like, well, maybe I gave it to my kids, right? And then my husband, the cardiologist, I said, well, maybe it's colonized from the hospital. And then so I published the first paper that showed 17 people with C. diff in their stools, and everybody went crazy. They're like, wow, that doesn't make sense. It's probably contaminated. It's colonized, da-da-da. And then I went up to 119 patients, and now we're up to 3,000 patients. And the majority have, in fact, 99% have that fingerprint of C. diff. The only ones that don't have C. diff are the people that are on chronic antibiotics. So you know that the antibiotics killed everything, including C. diff. Then when I did fecal transplant and I looked at my stools before and after, I realized, wait a minute, these people have C. diff because they have nothing in their gut. Their gut is desolate. So that's why C. diff is coming to kill them, because it has plenty of space to move around in the gut. to now secrete the toxin to kill the host. Think about it. Bacteria, viruses are very simple, right? They're simple little organisms. They don't have like a brain that, So if you're a bacteria and you're C. diff and you've got your families of Clostridium and your ruminococcus and your Faecalibacterium, and it's all that diversity, and all of a sudden the host takes an antibiotic and it kills the ruminococcus and it kills the Faecalibacterium and the Clostridium. C. diff is basically left alone. So it's like, it's pissed off because you've killed off all its families. So it's like, I'm secreting my toxin to kill the host. That's the way I look at it anyways. And
so basically it's like when yeast infection takes over, from antibiotics, or people that often carry strep or staph, and everything's kept in check when things are happy, hunky-dory, and you don't mess with the happy little family, the commensals. But yes.
How I explain it to my patients, because this is really common, we're primary care docs and do urgent care, it's the same with skin commensals, right? Because people will come in with folliculitis or whatever. How I explain it is, okay, do you want to go and buy a house in downtown Detroit? And the answer is no. Well, why? Because when there was no neighborhoods and all the families left, then all you were left with was gangs. And I said, and I said, that's why there's hygiene issues we need to deal with, which is not antimicrobial soap on your skin, et cetera, because otherwise all you're left with is the gangs. You don't want the gangs anymore. You want the nice neighborhood, everyone gets along.
Yeah. Right. And you want the balance. So if you have the gangs, you've got the good guys too that are strong enough to shut down the gangs, to kind of negotiate with the gangs.
So I think when we did our training, so I'm in residency, which was the early 90s, treating C. diff was with oral Flagyl or metronidazole medication. And then I remember like some people would be super sick and it wasn't working, and then they'd get put in a hospital, and then they would give it IV. And that was then quickly, I remember, I think at that time, one of the gastroenterologists we worked with actually was a female at that time, which was unusual. She's like, this doesn't make sense. Why are we giving this medication in the vein when we need it into the gut to kill the bacteria? So then it was back to the oral. And Tim doesn't remember this. Maybe it was just my experience, but I'm pretty sure. So this would have been 93, 94, that she was talking back then about emerging tech, which was fecal transplant. Yes. I think it was not when we're in Canada, right? So I don't think that they had done it, but she'd been talking about experimentation. And I remember them talking about NG tube, and all I could see was this horrible NG tube of stool going into somebody. But it was like, this is what they're using. And I'm like, oh, cool. But so so I have read your book. I actually just finished it, and it's awesome. And I learned a ton. And now I'm poking fun at Tim and telling him he needs to chew his food more and get some of my poop so he can lose weight.
She's trying to make me thinner by increasing my leptin somehow.
There you go. But so in what you wrote about is that this, in the U.S., fecal transplant is only approved by the FDA, right, for C. diff, no other conditions, even though, you're kind of seeing this, like you said, in concert, that other things are getting better. And when did they start doing fecal transplants? So it looks like in Australia, right? They were starting them first.
In the 80s. And he was looked at as a quack back then. All of us that start something new are looked at as quacks, right?
Right.
So he started it. And he basically was the pioneer that we kind of all followed, because he started publishing, and that's how you get the word out there. You start publishing, you get other doctors to follow your trend. So that was the first. I wrote the book mostly to start the movement, because what I was seeing was, we were being shut down from doing it. Imagine, as a doctor, you want to try to help a kid with autism, and, you're not allowed because you have to submit it. I understand you have to submit it to the FDA because it's a biologic, etc. But the thing is, even for C. diff, there's going to come a time when pharma is going to develop a product, and then they're going to stop us from doing our own, evaluation. And personally, I think fecal transplant is a patient-doctor relationship. I don't think it's a pharmaceutical product. It's very personal. Do you want to transplant the stools of a kid? You want to know who your kid is, because what we've seen from fecal transplant is personality changes, weight changes, hair changes, right? So if I get a pharmaceutical product, is the pharmaceutical product going to tell me everything about my donor? I think I should know, right?
Right.
Because then that should be on the thing. Your donor is an MIT student to blah, blah, blah. And if you look at the way that they process these stools, they're asking questionnaires of, what are the kids? Are you really trusting these MIT students to tell you, yes, they haven't traveled to Asia. No, they don't smoke marijuana. Or, and, they're getting paid $75 to donate their poop. It's like, give me the questionnaire. No. Sign me up. Give me $75 for giving poop, right?
Right.
As much as we want to believe that, yes, we screen them properly, etc., there are still some that we don't screen as well. And I worry that those few are going to cause a problem. Of course, in patients with C. diff, the patients are dying. You don't really have a choice, right? But if you're going to extend it and bring it as a and we all know pharmaceutical products, we as doctors use them, off label. What happens when somebody decides to give it to an irritable bowel syndrome patient, right? And not a person that has C. diff. And then all of a sudden that irritable bowel syndrome dies because they didn't have the right microbiome that was compatible with the donor, right? So there's all these questions. And because we're not in that, we don't know. And I anticipated all those problems because I'm in the clinical trial business. And I said to myself early on when I started seeing these clinical trials, I said, oh my God, we're in a big problem with these products. It's okay for C. diff if you're dying to have a pharmaceutical product, but I'm just worried about these products out there and then other doctors give them for other reasons off label. And now imagine we're messing up the whole microbiome that is supposed to be, different locations, right? Because the way I look at planet Earth is beautiful and humanity is beautiful because we're all different races, different microbes, different areas. Venezuela has different microbes than Mexico, than Canada. So all that makes that humanity that's different, right? What happens when you start globalizing all that? We've already seen what happens with globalization. We get globicity. And then with globicity, we have increased rate of, heart disease, diabetes, etc. But also with globalization, look at what's happening with autism. Look at what's happening with Parkinsons, Alzheimer's. All those are going up. Is it possibly because we're mixing all that microbiome?
That's really interesting. So,
well, I mean, like you say, it's technically like it would be like taking someone's blood back in the day and just transfusing it into someone else, thinking
they did that.
No, I know that.
That was World War I.
I know that.
They just connect two soldiers together. It's like, wow, that guy died and that guy's awesome. What happened?
Yeah. Or I don't know. Can you imagine just doing taking tissue in an organ transplant without screening and testing? Yeah.
And blood is one thing, but even, I think we need to understand more and we need to make sure that when it's released, that it's done properly.
So no, I'm sorry. So there's a couple things here that come to mind. So first of all, I've heard this stat, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's more living cells in your microbiome, your stool, than there is in the rest of your entire body.
Correct.
Right. So in essence, that's massively the biggest organ in your body. Like if you look at it like from a sort of a different sort of, teleological purposeful argument.
Yes.
Your poop is so literally like it's like there's way more living cells that this one still blows my way in your poop than in your entire rest of your body, which means your brain's only like what 7 to 12 pounds. So then literally everyone has shit for brains.
You can say that. You can say
to a certain degree. And then the other one, what is the most like outlandish change you saw in somebody that had a fecal transplant?
A suicidal patient that was happy and started drinking orange juice and craved orange juice. So this guy had the worst diet in the world, had chronic urinary tract infection, psoriasis, suicidal ideation, and C. diff. I gave him the stools of an English professor who was like amazing, happy, and craved orange juice. I mean, drank a lot of orange juice. And the patient actually started craving orange juice. He was no longer suicidal. He's happy. It's been 3 years. He's still retaining his stool transplant, so it's doing amazing. So, yeah.
Wow. So did you ever see the episode of South Park where the boys try to it's called Turd Burglars, and it is absolutely brilliant because the mother loses weight. One of the boys' mothers loses weight because she had a stool transplant. And so they start reading about the microbiome, and they sneak into Tom Brady's house because Tom Brady is the greatest human ever alive. And they're trying to steal his poo so they can get a stool transplant from Tom
I
Brady.
think right now the best poo is the one that survives COVID and didn't catch COVID yet. So I think, we're going to have it's going to be challenging times getting microbiome in the future because of this whole COVID. And, our lab identified COVID in the stools of patients, and we're still identifying it. So it's definitely there. So it's going to become challenging to look for donors and making sure that they don't have COVID. So
especially as this moves to an endemic illness, at least an endemic virus, how ill people get is hard to say.
Yeah, no, and you can imagine some people are carriers in their gut of COVID. We certainly have seen COVID in the stools for up to a year in some patients. So, and they were asymptomatic basically. So,
wow. So that one is kind of, because I know that you've spoken before a lot about how immunity is in the gut,
right?
And May and I were discussing that about how, how does your gut microbiome? I mean, it's weird. How does your gut microbiome make you crave orange juice and not be suicidal? That's one thing, but I can kind of hallucinate that, right? Because of, the serotonin receptors in your gut and these, these microorganisms are making, little tiny, micro hormones and all this kind of business. But like, how does immunity work from, because you've said that people that have high bifidobacteria tend to not get very sick from COVID. So do you understand that connection, or is it just kind of correlational and that's the way it is?
Yeah. So what I'm realizing is that it's not about the T cells and the B cells and the receptors. It's really at the it's even simpler than that. It's at the microbiome level. I think your barrier, your wall is your microbiome. I think when your microbiome is diverse, full of bifido, full of bacillobacterium, full of ruminococcus, full of clostridium, that's your diversity, that's your wall, that's your protection, right? So in my opinion, that's the first thing that, you need. And I think loss of immunity, what we're going to find out in the future is really this imbalance in the microbiome. Imbalances in perhaps the bifidobacteria, perhaps the bacillobacterium, perhaps the Bacteroides being high, perhaps, it's all about that. It's fascinating because there is definitely, it's very individualized. So when I look at these stool samples, some people will have, and that's why, all these stool tests that are out there are not really that specific, because when you start looking at it with a clinical picture and you have a patient that has an immunity problem, and you start looking at their microbiome and you see 0 Bacteroides, well, already there's one phylum that's disappeared. That's already out of balance, right? So you compare with your normals, you compare with the family, and you kind of start seeing the picture of the imbalance. And imbalances is very individualized. It's not two people have the same. Of course, there's an average and a bell curve, but there is, it's very individualized. Mostly because we're all different, a person from Venezuela that lives in Venezuela and a person that lives in America, from Venezuela has a different microbiome. And that gets adjusted with time, right? To adapt to the diet. I think that's what happens.
So speaking of diet, that's a perfect segue. this podcast will be aired at the very end of 2021. So it'll be what's the last Thursday, the 30th.
Yes.
So second last day. So, people are getting all ramped up. It's, I got to change my life, start going to the gym, et cetera, et cetera. Great time to own a gym. Terrible time to own a medical practice beginning of the year.
I don't know
right?
if it's a great time to own a gym yet.
Yeah.
Considering what's
well, depending on where you
but anyway.
But what can people do other than, coming to see you in California to get
no, don't get me. We're not even there. Don't bring people to get a stool.
Don't worry, we won't. But
yeah, but I think it's interesting because what I've noticed about this pandemic is the people that get infected are the people that are very anxious. So if anxiety is your problem, calm it down because you're not going to change what's going to happen tomorrow. So worrying about it is not going to help you, right? So I think calming it down. The other thing is vitamin C, vitamin D, is very important. Exercising, obviously people that do well, that exercise, if you have a digestive problem, well, then you're probably at a higher risk in my opinion. So yes, you could, contact us and get your stool tested just to see where you're at in your balance, but just understand that it is research and we don't have all the answers yet. And we are developing a stool assay that we want to make the doctors use so that you guys can start seeing, and I'm going to kind of help you guys to see what I'm seeing and how I'm reaching, improvement and how I even, figure out how to change the microbiome in a way just from the products that we have. That's the future. That's why my interest was really to work with the doctors, to get to the doctors, to have the doctors understand this path. I was at the conference on neurology, and Dr. Jordan was speaking, and he said, look, I send my Alzheimer's patients to Sabine, and we're working together on a protocol because fecal transplant is not there yet. So we have to work with the agencies to tell them to let us do fecal transplant. I'm kind of the PR person for fecal transplant in a way, because I want to make people aware that there is magic in poop. There is power in poop. And so the first thing is make sure what you're taking, right? So, drinking too many glasses of alcohol is probably not a good idea. Stick to one glass. They showed that one glass of red wine improves your microbiome. However, probably 5
kills it. Yeah.
And like you're having regurgitation, your whole digestive is off when you've drank so much. That's a vector when your microbiome is off because you've killed it with all this alcohol, or a lot of coffee too. A lot of coffee. I have so many patients. That's the hardest part, is like telling them to get off, coffee, or at least cut down to 1 cup a day. So 1 cup a day improves your microbiome. 5, 10 is not a good thing. Then you're getting yourself into reflux and you're getting yourself into, problems with stomach and digestion, etc. So I think those are the key things. Chocolates, not, one little piece of chocolate is great, but then more, you're creating a dysbiosis, in my opinion, in your gut. So I think as we're going to be showing the data of, what does chocolate do? What does coffee? Because that's my interest. My interest is really looking at all these, not as a, hi, let's bring a product, but hi, let's understand, what does chocolate do to my microbiome? What does coffee? That's how I knew. So I've been the guinea pig on this mission because I play with my microbiome. So, I'll drink like 5, 10 cups of coffee and for like 3-4 days, and then I'll retest myself and I'm like, whoops. I killed.
I don't think I'd need to test myself. I know exactly what would happen.
So
where I'd be.
So every once a month at least, I test myself on whatever I've changed.
Right.
Just to kind of see what is going on from baseline. And then once I see something interesting, then I bring on like 10 people and I go, hey, do you want to take vitamin C? And let me see what happens. If it's the same thing that I found. So we're actually going to show the data on what changes in the microbiome with vitamin C, what changes with vitamin D, how does ivermectin changes your microbiome, how does hydroxychloroquine changes your microbiome. So we're going to show all that.
So what about stuff like kefir and kombucha and
prebiotics and probiotics and all that stuff.
Because I've also read where people have taken so much probiotic that they've overgrown themselves with lactobacillus, and then and treating that is a nightmare.
That's a nightmare. Yeah. So it's all about the balance, right? So I basically, the probiotics, we actually just published a paper that showed that some probiotics can actually kill your gut. So we looked at the microbiome of people that were taking like over-the-counter, non-monitored probiotics, in other words, non-FDA approved probiotics, compared to other people that were taking the refrigerated version that's in a liquid, therefore it's anaerobic. Remember, probiotics are supposed to mimic your gut. Your gut is anaerobic, right? It doesn't breathe oxygen. So if you're taking a capsule that was man-made, where they put the capsule in there, is it really anaerobic at this point? I don't think so. I think it was exposed to air and therefore probably dead bacteria. What does dead bacteria do to a live gut? Probably kills it. Or the other hypothesis, which is what we've seen with laxatives, when you give people laxatives, your colon doesn't need it, right? So are you giving probiotics to your healthy gut, and therefore your colon doesn't need it to produce bifidobacteria because it says, hey, she's going to give me more. Why do I need to refuel? She's just going to keep giving it. So I think the key is really building your own bifidobacteria. And we've been noticing, all these patients that had COVID, severe COVID, we noticed that their bifidobacteria was 0. Let me tell you, I've tried everything on these patients. I've given them kefir and probiotics, and it's so difficult to replenish it. So difficult. So I worry about that because I wonder, well, have we killed all the bifido? First of all, did COVID enter the gut because the bifido was 0 to begin with? Or did COVID, which is a virus, cause a bacteriophage and killed off your bifidobacteria? Those are the two hypotheses, right? How do you have 0 bifidobacteria in your gut with COVID? So my big question then becomes, well, if I have 0, how do I replenish that? And do I replenish that by calming down my system, yoga, meditation, dropping the coffee, dropping the alcohol? Because remember, if you're in an environment, and I give that example of mold, right? You can detox your body all you want. You could go for the plasmapheresis, you could go for the colon cleansing, everything. But then guess what? If you're back in the home, surrounded by mold again, well, it's like you've done nothing. So
right.
It's exactly true. What I was really hoping you were going to say is I can counteract my large tumbler of vodka with a large tumbler of kombucha. But it really is how
she would love to check your poop and see what's going on in there.
Let's do the kefir, alcohol problem.
Yes.
So I want to know, because this is on the minds of, I'm sure, patients and docs, the whole thing of anytime we prescribe somebody antibiotics, especially 2 rounds, it's kind of like the standard is make sure they're taking their probiotic for at least 2 weeks. Is that even, is that still what we should be doing, even if it's the capsule brand that's on the shelf? Okay.
I mean, I don't know about the capsule brand. I'll tell you, I'm not a very big pusher of the capsule brand. I think, I'm very big in Activa yogurt. That stuff. I'm very big in kefir, the liquid, that stuff works. I just, VSL3, maybe, yes. For some patients I give it. I'm more of a natural food person, fermented food, sauerkraut, all that. Get your fermented foods up, your kombucha. I think all that helps in a way. And then I think your body eventually, after the antibiotics, once you give it those fermented foods, eventually catches up, especially if you calm down your system.
So it's kind of like that, what was it called? The friendship bread. You introduce a little bit of, you get that little friendship bread dough, and then you start to grow it in a jar, and it grows and grows, and then you can grow the bread and you give a little starter to somebody else. So that's basically what the kombucha and the kefir is doing, is it's starting to regrow your healthy gut microbiome, and then it will take off on its own.
point you have to kind of stop it, right? Because then
right.
Right? Because it's all about the balance. And I think that's the mistake and the problem that has happened. I think one of the big problem is, especially with the probiotics, is kids, I remember in my daughter's class, kids were taking probiotics in those capsules. And I said to them, why are you taking that? You're healthy. I mean, it's like, kids have an enormous amount of bifidobacteria. My daughter has like 1.7. I have bifidobacteria envy because she has 1.7 million bifidobacteria, And I'm like, can I have some of your poop? And she's like, I'm not a lab rat. Okay, I'm not. So, when you look at kids, babies have millions of bifidobacteria. Why in heaven's name would you want to give them probiotics? It makes no sense. You're treating your anxiety. You're basically so anxious that they're going to have GI problems because you have GI problems that you're giving them probiotics and then you're giving them GI problems. So I think the biggest thing is anxiety and calming down the system. Not getting, because, there's a rule, like if you keep scratching, eventually you'll hit blood, right? You got to stop the scratching. You got to calm down.
Yeah.
So,
I know. I've seen a bunch of people come in just off the street. I go over their med list and I'm taking, at first I didn't even know what prebiotics were. I had to look it up, but a prebiotic and a probiotic. And I'm like, why? Did your doctor put you, or your gastro put you on that? No, but isn't it better to have more? I'm like, well,
no.
Well, and it's
no.
It's so typically American though, right? Like you said, one glass of red wine is probably good for a whole bunch of things, including your microbiome. But of course 20 is better, right? I mean, and everything just to these massive, right? And like literally spoonfuls, like a bowl of cereal filled of vitamins. And I'm like, nobody knows what that does. I mean, come on.
To that point, how many people have we seen that come in with pancreatitis and that's all they take is these vitamins, and now they have chronic pancreatitis because their pancreas is so fragile that they took so many vitamins. Half the time it boggles me because I'm like, why are you taking so much? Even in the vitamins, I mean, if you're eating vegetables and fish, you're good. Even in the proteins, we overdo it. All you need is one egg a day, the equivalent of an egg a day of protein. That's all human beings need. But we're in a culture of supersize it, right? Costco. I always, I joke because I say it's marketing 101. The one thing America's really good at is marketing 101. They will brand that cream cheese, the supersize, and then eventually you wear the cream cheese. You need
Exactly. It's exactly right.
You look at France. They go to these little, épicerie and the corner market, and they get their little cheese, and they eat what they have for the week, and that's it. Simple life.
So what I really found fascinating in reading the book too was, because you go into, and you give a great synopsis on what the gut does from your mouth right to the anus, so for people that aren't medical, but all the things in between as far as how digestion and hormones happen in foods. I was fascinated about a few things, like chewing really makes a difference in weight, and people that chew more, I guess it's probably triggering more hormones and eating and digestion and triggering and shutting off the hunger center. But even certain foods and, we all know some are better than others and some have better antioxidants, etc. But I was like, wow, I never really thought corn was that. I mean, I don't like corn and we don't really eat it, but you just hate corn all around, like popcorn, the whole bit. So
I hate it. I eat it obviously once in a while.
Right.
Because it's the culture, right? Again,
right.
branding, movies, popcorn, right? So it's like branded to be automated, right? But yeah, corn is probably the worst food you could give yourself. There's nothing good about it, And how do you know? Because you eat a kernel and you swallow it, and you'll see it in your bowel movement. So it tells you to get absorbed. So there's
I have a friend. She said that she challenges her sister to eat it, and then she times her because she has such fast intestinal transit time that it's coming out in like hours.
Right.
And I'm like, well, that's crazy.
Yeah, and then oh, I'm on a popcorn diet and I'm losing weight.
Oh.
That works.
You might as well eat cardboard. Are you like, you're like a beaver and you're just eating cardboard.
So is that mostly unrefined corn? Like, what about, corn tortillas? Is it just corn in general?
I'm not a fan of corn. I'm not a fan of corn tortillas. I mean, listen, if you're raised on corn in Mexico and your corn tortillas is your meal with everything, then that's your diet. Yes, don't change your diet, especially if you don't have any digestive problems. But if you have not, like in my case, I'm a melting pot of Mediterranean, right? So Mediterranean diet is my comfort food. If I eat corn, it just doesn't sit with me.
That's a really interesting concept, though.
I've heard that from someone else.
That you I mean, which makes sense, right? Like, so if you're from, thousands of years of generations of people that were all through the Mediterranean, it kind of makes sense that your gut is going to adapt
to the Mediterranean
genetically
diet,
to the Mediterranean diet. And I'm still, that's my excuse. I am half of me is Russian.
That's it. You're feeding him the wrong food. That's it.
So I should be able to eat the pierogies and
and he does,
and butter and copious volumes of vodka, because that's I'm sorry, that's just me being me.
Oh my
but
goodness.
Probably you could tolerate all that. So I kind of came. I obviously it's hypothetical because it's all research and science. But you look at people from India that have come to America, and then all of a sudden the kids have celiac sprue. And you have to ask yourself, what happened to those kids? Why is that happening in that population, right? And the only explanation is really they've changed their diets from generations of, and you tell those families, you say, you know what, probably restart your usual diet. And then they start feeling better in their food, eating and everything. So, one of my first change that I make in patients is really telling patients to just change their diet back to what their family. And inevitably half the time they'll say, yes, I feel better because I've gone back to what I was eating.
That means you and I have to eat buttloads of corn feed every summer because that's what our family.
Oh, your family, yeah. No, I hate corn too. Honestly, it completely jacks me up.
What I want to know, we have to go there just a little bit. Even I don't know if it's kind of your expertise or not, but you're in GI, so what the heck? But everybody now is going gluten free. So okay, it's the new trend, sort of. So. What is happening? I mean, are things happening, like you say, with food and an environment, or is it more that people are just recognizing that maybe they've had these problems, and it's a spectrum for years, but, I remember I was a kid and I was lactose intolerant. I had these tummy aches, and what was the solution? They'd be like, drink some warm milk, you'll feel better, and it'd get worse. So is it that we just didn't recognize it, or is it actually maybe getting worse?
I think we're changing our microbiome, I'll be honest. I think we are changing, we're either adapting, but I think we're changing our microbiome. I mean, look at the kids with, in 1980, the rate of autism was 1 in 2,000. Now it's 1 in 20. What is happening there, right? And then when you start looking at kids with autism, you see a dysbiosis. I mean, it's obvious, right? And it's so frustrating because I just saw a paper the other day that was written by a scientist that I respected from Australia. And he said, oh, well, kids with autism are just finicky eaters. And I said, no, they're not finicky eaters. They were born with a microbiome dysbiosis. We published a paper of triplets where the mom had a clear, so here's a classic picture again. Indian family moved to America. She probably started, cooking and eating the foods of America, adapting. But when you looked at her microbiome, 40% of her microbiome was of a bacteria that's not really, that was high. That's not really seen so much, right? And then what we saw in triplet 1 and triplet 2 is that their microbiome was totally diverse. So you can imagine in utero, they probably were fighting and they got the good food. And then the third one got the 40% times 2. So 80% of her microbiome was that bad bacteria.
Wow.
So you could see how, so that family, basically one kid was transplanted, to another kid. And so you could see how the microbiome alteration happened, transferred from mother to child. And you wonder if maybe it's from that microbiome, that microbiome change that the mom did. And then when you go to these conferences too, you start seeing, a lot of ethnic families. So you wonder if that transfer from that area to here created a problem or not in their microbiome and disrupted their microbiome. So of course, this is me as a scientist asking all those questions. These are all hypothetical, but I think we have to pay attention. I think we have to pay attention when celiac sprue is going up. I don't think celiac sprue existed back in the days. Yes, we're aware. Yes, 20% of the population, but I think we changed the foods. We manipulated the foods. We killed the soil. We're no longer, think about it. We're no longer look at Japan, okay? And this is I'll just go off topic there. Japan has a good soil, right? Streptomyces is in their soil, right? Which is the fermented product, which is the bacteria fermented product that made ivermectin, right? Their soil is rich. Is the soil rich in Japan? And is that why they're surviving COVID? Because their foods are getting the right microbes and therefore they're eating the right microbes and therefore they're healthier? We have in America, killed our soils. How do you replenish that, And then so you're doing, and this is the problem. And this is a problem we keep doing, right? We keep killing. So we're killing C. diff, right? So let's kill C. diff instead of let's bring more bacteria to suffocate C. diff, right? Let's kill the soils instead of bringing more bacteria to remove the weeds a natural way, right? Because if you plant more diversity, you're not going to have a lot of weeds because the space is taken up, right? I mean, that's how I like to think of it with the microbiome, right? It's all like a big garden. So you've got your blueberries, your tomatoes, your pumpkin, and then all of a sudden you kill off the blueberries, the tomatoes, and you're just left with the weeds. The weeds are going to take over the ground. And then you're going to be left with a desolate garden that's not growing anything. It's the same thing in your gut. You kill off. Eventually you have nothing. And worse is we are passing those depleted microbes to the next generation. If you look at the farmers or the Amish population, right, their diversity of their microbiome is over 7.5. Okay, like the farmers. I actually was at a farm, Polyface Farms, and nobody was wearing a mask, and it was in the middle of the pandemic, and everybody was challenging me and said, COVID doesn't exist. And they're like, prove it. It doesn't exist. We don't believe you. And I'm like, wait a minute, didn't you guys get affected by COVID? They're like, yeah, we got affected because we couldn't sell our fruits and vegetables. And then it stopped, the restaurants, etc. And then I said, no, but nobody got COVID in this region? They're like, no, barely had anybody. So I'm like, you know what? I need to analyze your stools. And I started analyzing the microbiome of the farmers. Their diversity is enormous compared to a city person that's in an office desk. And by the way, it goes even more than diversity. It's like the phylums. Remember the phylums in school? The top of the kingdom kind of thing.
Oh yes. The yes.
Class, order, family,
right.
genus.
Yeah.
So the phylum is like the continent of the planet, right? So they had 5 or 6 continents in their guts, right? Now I'm seeing, especially in the long haulers, there's continents that are disappearing. There's a problem. So we're giving so much antibiotics that we're killing the phylums of the human, and then the human's having a baby. Well, what is the human giving to that baby? So you start off with 5 phylums, and then you go down to 2 phylums, and then you're giving to the baby your 2 phylum. Well, that's not enough to survive the ecosystem of the planet and all these viruses that are around us. You need a good, diverse gut.
No, but
again, this is we're killing. We are trained, programmed to kill, right?
Well,
we should be diversifying.
right.
No, it's wild though.
I mean, it's sanitized to like our own harm. I mean,
right,
Yeah.
like it, like there's the balance between, humans a gazillion years ago ate half-rotten meat,
Yes.
were infected with parasites,
Yes.
chronically. Okay, so we solved that problem, and that's a good problem to solve.
Yes.
I mean, the no tapeworms, the no giardia, I'm totally down for that. But at the same time, we sterilized everything. We introduced antibiotics, industrial farming, the mechanization of food, which again, food production, because just getting food that wasn't spoiled and killed you from botulism was a huge deal during the Industrial Revolution. It was important that you process food. Processed food saved countless millions of people. But now we've got it so perfect and so commercialized that you're kind of sterilizing part of your gut. And then you add to that, good jobs are sedentary jobs. And,
that's a problem. Yes.
And then everybody in the world is traveling all over the place. And you go, wow, like, why is everyone fat? Okay. There's about 10 reasons.
No kidding. No kidding.
So you're cleaning up your gut. That's pretty much, so it's all about the balance, and we've not done a good job with the balance of the ecosystem or the balance of the human microbiome. And what I worry about is if we're down to 2 phylums in humanity, what's going to happen to humanity? And by the way, if you look at, microbiome diversity, it's the same thing as humanity on the whole, right? Humanity is beautiful and survives because of the differences. If you just leave one race alone, that race is not the same as another race. Every race brings on something to the planet. So if you leave one race, humanity is not going to survive. Same as if you leave the C. diff and and in the phylum, that's it. It's not going to survive. The human being is not going to survive. The host is going to die.
No, it's just such an elegant way to look at it, because it rings so true, because it's true everywhere else, in the world. Like it fits it's like when you come up with a philosophy of life, it needs to fit the world. It doesn't just need to be theoretically appealing. And that's the case. It's just like, when they studied some of these Pacific Islanders, these people are super fit. They're out there fishing all day. They're eating tons of fish. They're eating tons of fruit, and they're rowing, kayaks everywhere, and they're fit and warriors and all that. And then you bring them to a standard North American diet, which is lots of carbohydrates, tons of simple sugars, et cetera, and way less exercise. And these people just explode,
Well, of course, you bring the food to them, like in the islands of Kiribati, where basically this population used to fish, used to plant, grow things, and then all of a sudden you send them processed food, and they don't fish anymore, and they don't culture anything, and then they start gaining weight on Coke and chips, and then the rate of heart disease is through the roof, the rate of diabetes is through the roof. They have a huge problem in those islands because of that, shipment of these foods. So
that's like that all over the world. I mean, where we talked about people are used to a certain diet, they're genetically inclined to be able to metabolize certain types of foods, and then you're right, you introduce high sugar or high carbohydrate diets, and the rates of hypertension or diabetes just go crazy all over the place.
Well, when you were in Mongolia, like every single person had out of control hypertension,
and the Philippines too.
Unreal, just unbelievable.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, when you go outside of America and you start seeing these cultures like Amazon jungle, believe it or not, the Amazon jungle doesn't have bifidobacteria in their gut because they're in a different environment. Where would they get the bifidobacteria? They don't have cows and milk and all that. So they're basically drinking Coke. They're drinking the foods of their area, which was actually a challenge because I was taking care of people in the Amazon jungle. And I said, well, you need to, and I was giving them certain drugs. And I said, well, you need to take that with a fatty meal. And they said, well, what's a fatty meal? What are you growing over there? So you adapt. But by the way, an interesting thing, they cultured Larry Weiss, who I work with, is a scientist. And he did an expedition in the Amazon jungle, and actually they cultured the skin microbiome of the women there to see why don't they have an increased rate of skin cancer, etc. And they discovered there's a layer of microbes above the skin that actually protects you. What happens is when the person from the Amazon jungle comes to America and they take that first soap, the whole layer disappears. Where
Wow.
So we need to kind of be more in with nature, in with the planet. And I think we're too isolated. I think the quarantine also didn't really help because we put everybody in at home. They weren't exposed to vitamin D. Think about it. You need vitamin D. That's the number one. The number one thing that I realized with COVID was how deficient the population is in vitamin D.
Yeah.
So if there's one advice that I could give out there is make sure your vitamin D level is above 50, because vitamin D protects you against colon cancer. It's important. It's the sun. It's how plants grow. It's how, can you have a tree in a glass? Can you have an apple tree in a glass dome? Do you think you're going to ever grow apples? No way. It needs sun, water, air, microbes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I know that there are probably hundreds of questions just firing through my brain that I'm like, oh, there's so much more. We'll have to have you back because I'm thinking of all these questions. But we are coming to the end of our time and appreciate you so much being here. Why don't you tell everyone the best way to get a hold of your book and read it? I purchased mine through Amazon.
Amazon is the best. Amazon. And just, give us a nice comment on there. It's actually kind of fun because a lot of my doctor's friends have read it and they commented and I said, give me an honest opinion. And who started me in the shit business really by planting the seed years ago in my brain said, you know what? They got it right. He gave me a good comment on it. So I was very happy to see that from him because he's like straight up honest to the max. So
perfect.
He's like one of those that's like, will tell you if it's a thumbs up or thumbs down. So I was so happy when I saw thumbs up from him. So yes, Amazon, Let's Talk Shit.
So everybody, everybody get their copy of Let's Talk Shit. I'll put the link in there in the show notes as well. It's super. I love it because I was laughing out loud reading it, and so it's fun. It's lighthearted. I mean, how could you not make fun of poop? I mean,
and you know what? I didn't know what to name it. Right? I was like, let's talk microbiome, but I wanted people to understand and feel comfortable. Because they need to talk to you guys about that. And people shouldn't be shy about talking about their shit. And also it makes you laugh and it's less, threatening to read. And it's kind of, so that's why I wanted to call it that. And also, let's face it, 2020 and 2021 was just shit. So
exactly.
And I'm out there doing the clinical trials on 2 of the controversial drugs. So I said to myself, people are going to try to criticize me. So I could say, hey, I could be full of shit or I could know my shit. You decide.
I love it. Perfect. Totally perfect.
No, this is good. I want to do this again, though, seriously, because it really is such a – and part of it is how you look at things. Like it isn't just, this like the, deconstructing sort of this, kill or whatever – and where everything in medicine is obviously pharmaceutically based now.
Yes.
And, you go way to one end of natural, whatever. And I used to tell patients, I'm like, well, death is natural. I mean, we should take your appendix out because you're probably going to die and you might need antibiotics. I mean, there's that. And then this other side where when I saw restless leg syndrome as a diagnosis, back 20 some years ago when I started practice, I was like, they're making shit up now to sell pills. Like seriously, they're making this up to sell pills. Right. And I think to a certain degree they are, so right. it's refreshing.
I think too far, but I think also, listen, we are all scientists. We have to ask questions. We don't know it all. We barely know the 0.1%, especially when you get into the microbiome. So to think like we know what's going to happen in 10, 20 years and that we're not messing up, we have to stay humble, I think. I always say, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm okay to jump into it, right? When I read that paper from Dr. Adams on autism, that 50% of autistic children improve their neurological symptoms, I said, okay, well, I guess I'm doing fecal transplant and I'm going to start writing the protocol. And I did, and I put it through the FDA. Now, I may not find the same results. I may fail, but guess what? I'll have tried, because the trying gives hope to people. If we don't try and we don't ask questions, we stop ourselves from advancing, from innovating. What, I'm going to just listen to some scientist in a lab because they have one view of how to get out of the pandemic? No. I'm going to look at my way, because guess what? We're still in a pandemic. So I always joke and I say, when everybody will have failed, I'll come out and they'll say, I wonder what Dr. Hazan's doing.
No, it reminds me of the quote of what Winston Churchill said about the United States. He says, the Americans are really good at making the right decision after they've made all of the wrong ones first.
Right. And then, by the way, he also said, if you have enemies, good. That means you stood for something during your life. So I'm good. I want to spend.
I love it.
Outstanding. Excellent. Well, I think that's a great place to stop. Thank you again so much, Dr. Hazan.
Thank you so much, guys.
So much fun chatting.
Thanks.
Okay, well, that was really mind-blowing. Like this whole concept of you have an FDA-approved treatment for a very specific problem. You treat that problem with, what seems common sense. You're giving somebody new gut flora, and then it changes their entire life, personality, weight, etc. It's crazy. I really am tempted to drive down to Malibu and get a fecal transplant with, I'm thinking, black lab.
Mm-hmm.
Because the energy levels and whatnot would be pretty crazy.
So, I see. So you want black lab stool in your body? I'm
thinking, yeah. The crotch sniffing might get out of hand.
I'm thinking I'm going to go for like Amy Lee, and maybe I can sing like her in Evanescence.
Yeah, maybe.
It would be a fun experiment.
And then people would hear you and they go, nope, still sings like shit. Because even the transplant didn't do anything.
The shit would make me sound like shit. Anyway, I think I don't know, this should be a DocTales episode and we'd be celebrating 52 episodes. What do you think?
Yeah, but, next episode will be
next year.
Our year in review, where we go through kind of the 52 episodes and talk about what we liked. There's some stuff that we did earlier on before the podcast became more popular and before we got into some of the interviews with the COVID heavy hitters that I really want to hit on because they're really good and they're really interesting and I think they're very pertinent for what's going on today. So we'll get into that stuff.
We'll share our favorite episodes as well as let you know what your favorite episodes were throughout the year based on listener downloads.
All right. So till next time, hang in there and work on cultivating a good biodiversity in your pooper.
Or cultivate your shit.
That's right.
It's no secret that medicine is a bit, uptight. That's why Tim and I created BS Free MD, to mix things up a little and have fun in the process. Besides, we are having these exact same discussions all the time, so we thought we might as well invite everyone to the party. If you really like us, you can get plenty more and maybe see one of Tim's cool tattoos on our Instagram or Facebook pages at BS Free MD. See you next time.
While we try to keep BS Free MD as raw and real as possible, we can't be held responsible for any medical decisions or discussions had as a result of what you've heard on the show. We know, bummer. But the truth is, we really do care about your questions. So feel free to reach out to us by email at doc@bsfreemd.com.
It's wild. All right, 3, 2, 1. Well, we are very excited to have. Oh, hang on. I'm going to start over again. How do we say your name correctly so we're not an idiot? Hazan? Okay, like raisin. Okay.
Oh,
Well, when we
gosh.
interviewed Harvey Risch, he knew. He said it's Risch like fish, and I'm like, okay, I can deal with that.
Shit.
You know. All right. Okay, we're starting over.